Hello and welcome everyone to another show of SacTown Talks. Jarrett Blinding here, and we have a great show for you today. Assemblyman Kevin McCarty. Kevin, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us. How's it going?
It's going great. So I'm a SacTowner and I love to talk. So here I am. Let's do this.
I guess some exciting news we just got first. Kamala Harris was just announced vice president. I guess can we just get your thoughts right off the top on kind of what that means for California and us here locally?
Well, I'm super excited. I'm a big fan and supporter of hers. I endorsed her run for the presidency a year and a half ago. And I think she'll make a fabulous vice president. And I think she'll do a great job on the campaign trail. And of course, it'll be great for California. I was just thinking about the last time we had a Californian in the White House. I guess it was Ronald Reagan. So that was 32 years ago. I think Nixon was the VP, right? For Eisenhower, right?
Right, yeah.
He was either VP or ran as a VP. So I know he was the president, of course. So I'm trying to think of the last time we had a Californian as the VP. So this is a big deal for California, and I think for the Democratic ticket and Joe Biden.
Yeah, obviously, this year a lot of things have been going on, and I guess a lot here recently locally, due to the George Floyd protests. There's been a lot of social unrest. I guess what does this mean? I guess to the Black community having a female, Black, vice president selection.
Well, I think she's eminently qualified for this position. African American woman or not. She's interesting. She's biracial. I relate to her because I'm biracial as well. She's half Asian and half African American. But in today's world, you're a Black woman. You're a Black woman. So I think that she's labeled as a Black woman sometimes before being an Asian woman. That's just how it is. But I think there's a lot of pride out there. Her being the first African American woman on a presidential ticket. And it means a lot. And that she's had her place in this criminal justice reform. I think she's been maligned a little bit too, unfortunately. Frankly, too much. She was a former DA and she was a former attorney general, but she did some good work on this front. And I think that we'll be talking about that as far as her platform with Joe Biden for America in 2020.
Yeah, I guess locally, I guess Sacramento in the past 6 months has totally changed its landscape. Here, downtown has just become kind of a ghost town of sorts. Storefronts boarded up. I guess Kevin, can you kind of talk to us, I guess, about what the plan is for, I guess, downtown and moving forward, and I guess how to reinvigorate this area, post COVID-19?
Yeah, I think I'm very, very concerned about that because we saw the last recession. When our state workers took a hit, it had a big impact on our downtown. And I think that there's two issues going on right now. Is that one, just the amount of economic development and money being spent in the downtown core. We're seeing that, near the Capitol. There's no tourism there, no state workers shopping. Sometimes all you see down there is the negative element.
Right.
Unfortunately, we have that in our core, and that's kind of all you see right now. But I think the big deal that's happening across our state and frankly our globe is, what does work look like in the future? A lot of this telecommuting, you're seeing it in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, the tech industry, where people work from home. So do state workers, do they need to go to work every day? Can they work remotely from home? Maybe half-time, this and that. So I think this COVID-19 is really a reality check of what the future of work looks like. And it could have some major consequences for downtown.
It's interesting, as you're saying, people are telecommuting, people are, I guess, like moving their children now, looking to where they can go to school. Kind of want to get your sense, before you were in the Capitol, you did some work in, early childhood education. I know your wife does some work on the school board, and I know you're a parent yourself. Kind of, I guess, what are your thoughts kind of going into, I guess, this school year about, kids going back to school in this COVID-19 era, and, when is it safe to do so? A lot of people are looking for waivers and things like that. So it's kind of an interesting time.
I'll get to that in a second, but I just want to go back for a second about Sacramento, because what's happening in Sacramento is interesting. Granted, we're seeing less activity downtown with COVID-19 and the impact of coronavirus. But if you're looking what's happening across the state and the nation, Sacramento is actually going to be a beneficiary of this. There's reports that, in New York and San Francisco, those cities are depleting because rents are so high and people
Right.
can work remotely. So if you can work remotely, why pay $6,000 a month for an apartment in San Francisco when you can live in Sacramento, a cool downtown too, for $2,500 a month? And so you're seeing that Sacramento and Phoenix are the top two cities as destinations for people leaving these other big cities during COVID-19. So
Oh, interesting.
interestingly enough, right now we see this impact, but we could have another impact. And that leads to other problems and rising rents here and gentrification. And how does that squeeze out people at the lower end economically in Sacramento with wealthy Bay Area people coming in? We were seeing that anyway. And so this is going to have another impact. But your second question you talked about is COVID-19 in our schools and childcare. And it's a huge issue because if you want, the economy to function again, to get people back to work, you need to have functioning schools and functioning childcare programs. And those really aren't functioning right now.
Right.
First, we'll start with schools. Hopefully we'll get back to work eventually, but right now it's based upon this notion of distance learning out of the outset. And eventually, hopefully there'll be a hybrid where you go back to school, let's say part-time and do some stuff from home. But the childcare thing is really problematic because, people can't go back to work, and there's not enough childcare centers that are open, and the childcare centers that are open, they're financially not really viable right now because they're not getting the proper reimbursements from the state. They're having to pay more money for, PPE and safety issues, and they're serving fewer amount of toddlers and young kids in the center. So, you have the costs are the same, but the revenue coming in because of that service is down. So it just makes it really, really dicey, the financial viability of childcare in California. And that's really hard. And it's hard on parents, especially hard on working women, of course. So that's a big issue that we're trying to address in our state budget and legislation this year.
I guess playing off that, safety, I guess, is a huge concern. A lot of uncertainty of I guess, when is it safe to send kids back to school? How many of them can be in a classroom? I guess, has there been any talk about that? About when is it safe for children to return back to school in I guess, a semi-normal classroom environment?
Well, we're trying to be really objective on that. And so it's up to each county health department. They have these indicators as far as hospitalizations, capacity with the ICU, and all that. So, California is very diverse. We have 58 counties. The demographics are different, and the way of life. Modoc County, Sierra County versus Sacramento and Alameda County, right?
Right.
So, we're based upon some metrics. And so, when it is safe, there'll be a trigger pulled, and then people will be able to go back to school and to work. But it won't be the same as before anyway. You'll go back to school like on a part-time basis, and your work will be a little bit different. So, and we have a long ways to go. We need to get, a vaccination for COVID-19, and we need to get, adequate treatment for people when they get sick for COVID-19.
Yeah. Early in the year, a lot of legislators had big plans. They had many bills. And then, everyone was forced to kind of put their bill packages on a diet. Can you kind of talk to us about how your bill package has changed, I guess, throughout the year, and I guess where it is right now?
Yeah, I had big aspirations for debt-free college, for early education expansion and pre-K for all here in California. And, those things really aren't realistic with the budget situation. We wanted to expand funding for our public schools and work on education initiatives, and those things that cost money are kind of put on hold. So we really had to focus on the issue at hand and COVID-19 and how these impact families and businesses and students today. But also, the show goes on. We have other problems and issues in California, and our speaker said that all along. And I was, really proud that heard our speaker said that, is that, look, we have a state of 40 million people. All these issues are not going away. Our constituents are counting on us to do the business for the state. And so that being said, we have other issues we're working on, and some have risen up. Police reform was one. That interestingly enough, ironically, was an issue that I had been pushing before. So it's been elevated now. So those bills are actually more important today and are frankly getting a chance to move forward because of what we're seeing with the post George Floyd era.
I know there's a bill you're working on. Was it AB 1506, kind of dealing with peace officer training standards? Can you kind of go into detail on what you're seeking to do there, and kind of why isn't something like this, already in place? As you kind of noted, George Floyd died of the carotid hold. I know Mike Gibson is running a bill to ban the carotid board, but there seems to be, I guess, a lot of outdated kind of training procedures in there that could use some review.
Yeah, well, we're looking at a whole host. So we're looking at a package of bills. California last year passed a major reform on the use of force when police can use deadly force. The prior law was when it was reasonable, and that, of course, is very subjective. And now it's focused on only when necessary. But there are a bunch of other issues that we want to tackle. I'm working on a couple of bills as well. The majority of them are authored by members of the Black Caucus. And so, we're excited to have our leadership in this space. Some, like you mentioned, are banning the chokehold, which we saw with George Floyd. We have some bills on decertifying police officers when they cross the line. If you're a nurse, a teacher, a doctor, even someone who does nails, and you mess up in your profession, you lose your license. But if you're a peace officer, sometimes you go to a different department down the street, and they don't even know about what happened to you before. Then I have a couple major bills I'm working on related to investigations for deadly force, and then one for oversight of sheriff's departments. So the first one is, it's hard to find credibility when police and local DAs police themselves. So when there is an incident of deadly force, it's important to have an independent investigation. They're doing this in Minneapolis with George Floyd. We actually did it last year in Sacramento with Stephon Clark. Having the local DA do the investigation, just creates too many issues of conflicts because, the local DAs are so cozy with local law enforcement. That's how they get elected and so forth, that there's just a lot of problems. And so having an independent entity outside makes a lot of sense. So we're looking to have the Attorney General be the state prosecutor, do these investigations. That's something they've done in 5 states across the nation. It's time for this reform. We have about 50 joint authors with us. So we're looking to make this a reality in 2020. I also have a big bill on sheriff's departments. We see in cities, they have a lot of police departments that have oversight bodies that, focus on the policies of the local law enforcement, but also the impact. A lot of times these police departments, they make mistakes, and we pay these huge settlements for wrongful death, use of force. And so sheriff's departments don't always have the same type of oversight. We saw here, and we had one here in Sacramento, an example where we had an oversight entity for the county of Sacramento, and the sheriff didn't like what they were talking about. So they changed the lock on the door so that people couldn't go to work. And that's kind of ridiculous. And it's not like the person who was the inspector general, wasn't qualified. There was a former police chief of Sacramento who was an expert in deadly force, use of force, Rick Brazil. And so the sheriff didn't like his findings on a couple of shootings of his sheriff deputies. So he basically fired the guy by changing the lock. And so my bill would say that can't happen. It would give these entities subpoena power to get the information they need to provide proper oversight for sheriff's departments. And so I think these two things at times right, but clearly these are tough bills. But in the era of George Floyd, we're getting a lot of traction on these measures that before were more difficult.
We recently had Dr. Weber on last week, and kind of we went through a lot of issues on ethnic studies and kind of her police reform issues, and she brought up a couple interesting points. Earlier in the interview, you kind of brought up the point yourself of you coming from a biracial background. Can you kind of talk to us? I guess it'd be your perspective of being biracial and kind of talking through the community on kind of your thoughts on, I guess, what's going on here in America on this talk on race and these social justice reforms.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a very personal issue for me. I'm a product of a biracial family. My mom was from England, an immigrant from England, and my dad, African American. Both of my grandparents on my dad's side were African American. One was from Texas, and one was from the Deep South in Louisiana. My grandpa was born during Reconstruction, and he fled as a young man during the era of Jim Crow. He was 18 years old, and in 1905, and fled Deep South Louisiana and went west to Arizona and then California. And so, his experience, my grandparents' experience, my dad's experience, my cousin's experience, it all impacts me and the issues that I'm working on as a lawmaker. I mean, clearly, I haven't lived the same experience as my cousins and even my sister. I look, I look very Caucasian, so I probably haven't had the discrimination, the overt discrimination that many members of my family have seen. But I know about it and I feel it. And that motivates me to bring about justice, to push these issues that really matter, because a lot of people have had been held back for education opportunities, employment opportunities, just living their life in and unfortunately not always a racially colorblind society. So these things are alive and well, and so I'm pushing these issues in my agenda as a lawmaker in California.
Yeah. Recently you guys, are working on a Prop 209 repeal. You guys passed the ACA. It's been on the ballot, placed on the ballot for November. Can you kind of, I guess, give us your opinion on why you think that is a necessary change, and what change you think that's going to bring about in the future?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the electorate's changed a lot in the last 25 years since that was on the ballot. Ironically, the person who put on the ballot was our governor at the time, Pete Wilson, who was running for president, and he wanted to exploit this as a wedge issue. We're seeing that same thing with our president today. So, it passed, not by a huge margin, but by a comfortable margin. But the electorate's changed. I think that people realize that, it was a failed experiment, that, the racial inequities have gotten worse in California, and it's time to take a look at this. I think the fears people think about this are unfounded. The Supreme Court's already ruled that quotas are illegal, so this isn't going to change admissions to the University of California per se, but it'll say that race can be a factor in employment, in contracting, and education. And so, think about the college experience where, we don't have a lot of diverse faculty members. So this will allow us to basically be more aggressive in hiring women and, people and African Americans, Latinos, Asians as professors. And that would make, higher education, I think, better. We'd be able to focus more on employment opportunities for women, people of color, and state contracting. So, there are a powerful interest against this. Frankly, a lot of it's the construction industry. A lot of these firms, white-owned firms, have made billions of dollars every year from these contracts, and they frankly they bankrolled the initiative 25 years ago, and they're the ones spending a lot of money today because there's a lot to lose. So follow the money, they always say in politics and crime and stuff. You can see where the issues are. This is the same thing. There's a lot of money at stake for these contractors, these highway contractors, who would have to, open up some of these contracts to women-owned businesses, to minority-owned businesses. But I fully support it. The electorate is supportive, I think, too. We saw lawmakers who heard about this from their districts after George Floyd, because it's not just police reform, it's some of this racial inequities in California. And what's one tool to address racial inequity? Ironically, same time we're talking about this, affirmative action. So bringing it back in a legal way that the Supreme Court has allowed us to do so, we think is the right time, but also it'll help California bring about more opportunity for all communities.
Definitely, well said. I guess to bring things back locally, can you kind of tell us, what is your office mainly working on right now locally, kind of dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, and kind of what are you seeing within the district office, kind of the effects being held here locally?
Well, it's hard on a lot of our constituents. Obvious one for my constituents and people across the state is unemployment. As we're doing this podcast now, the federal unemployment is winding down, and there's a debate about executive order and the president and bills back and forth. But right now, families are left in limbo, and that impacts people's ability to pay their rent, to buy food for them, for their families. And so these are real world consequences. And so my office is getting inundated on a daily basis by people trying to navigate EDD and unemployment. And we're trying to help. But we have this backlog of EDD of 1 million people, which is outrageous. It would take 7 months for them to fix that. And so we've seen dozens of lawmakers step up and tell the governor, hey, we need to step it up and do a better job getting people their unemployment benefits. We're also concerned about people paying their rent, and whether it's renters or small businesses that have to pay their rent and their loss of income. So, in addition to the public health issues of people just staying healthy and not getting sick and staying out of hospitals, there are some economic consequences that we're dealing with on a daily basis in my district and with my district office.
I think one of the most interesting thing about your district is probably one of the most diverse districts probably in the state. A large Hispanic population, a large Asian population, a large Black population. I guess within the different sections of your district, do you see any trends or anything about how certain sections are dealing with COVID-19 versus others?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that people with resources, predominantly Caucasian, are able to bridge this COVID storm because they can work from home. But it's poor families, primarily brown and Black workers. They work in the service industry. They work at restaurants. They work gas stations. They do delivery of food. They work at they're out there, and so they're exposed. They can't work from home. So you see the numbers of brown and Black Californians disproportionately testing positive. And you look at people who live in multi-generational households where there's grandma and grandpa, the family, and the grandkids all living together, sometimes multiple families in one household. So it's hard to quarantine and kind of shelter in part of a house when you have so many people living together. So we've seen there's this, the realities of race and poverty are ringing true, and who gets impacted by COVID-19. I think that's a reminder of the work we need to do on all these fronts. The racial inequities of healthcare and education and employment really ring true.
Something you touched on earlier, about, early childhood education, some of these things that you were looking, forward to, free college and things like that. But of course, the budget fell apart. Kind of looking to next year, the budget situation is looking even more dire. What can be done and what are you looking to do next year in education to, try to, shore up, funding for this kind of system that needs additional resources?
Yeah, well, on all these issues, I think there's opportunities for college. As you said earlier, I'm working on not free college, by the way. We're calling it debt-free college.
Okay.
Because I don't think that my kids and your kids should necessarily get free college. It'd be nice, but I think we should be able to pay tuition. But families that make, let's say, under $100,000,
right,
let's help them pay for tuition, but also give them a little bit of money to pay for the room and board, because it costs so much to go to college now. So we're looking at a debt-free college plan. Maybe there's a special revenue source. Maybe it's legalizing sports gaming in California. There are a few ideas that we could focus on having a dedicated revenue to pay for that. So general fund is tight, of course. That leads to the early education, which is, you have to compete with all the other general fund priorities. But, we're not going to be in this recession forever. So we want to plan, for better days. I'm really excited that Governor Newsom is a big supporter of preschool and childcare access, expanding that. Because if there's one thing you can do to improve educational outcomes, address intergenerational poverty, even address the school to prison pipeline. Every economist says early education. So I along with the governor have been pushing preschool for all, universal access. We've been partnering with the Legislative Women's Caucus as well to expand childcare, to make that universally accessible in California. So those two things are still on the burner, maybe just a bit right now on the back burner. And then with school funding, that's an issue that every lawmaker is all in support of. It's a disgrace that California is 40th in the nation, or low 40s in per pupil funding. So we have some ideas for some ballot measures to increase school funding, maybe adjusting our corporate tax rate here in California. Big corporations, the 1% companies, they're doing very well. Look at the stock market, look at their earnings, they're doing very well. And they got a big break in the Trump tax cuts. So maybe something we can adjust our corporate tax rate in California and, spread the wealth and help schools across our state.
No, yeah, definitely. It's always amazing when you hear how low we are in per capita funding. That's definitely something that, it needs to be addressed, even though we do spend so much.
Yeah.
I know time's running short and you got to go. But I just wanted to ask you one more question, I guess, about kind of distance learning here locally. Do you see when your constituency, do they have the necessary, I guess, broadband access and I guess devices to enable distance learning to be effective?
They don't. I think that's one, failure on us in this distance learning, is that some families, their internet access is their mom's phone. You can't really see it right here on the screen.
Right.
Their mom's either Android or whatever they have. That's their internet access. Doesn't always work. Maybe you have 3 and 4 kids in the household and school. You're sharing the computer. So that's something that we really, really need to step up and make sure, because otherwise it's totally unfair. How are some kids going to learn, without the tools in the toolbox? It's like telling some kids, 30 years ago, once you do your homework, you don't even have a pencil or a pen to do your work. So we're working on that. I know some of these tech companies in California have stepped up and providing free and very low cost internet service. I think that's a big boost. The computers don't seem to be the issue. I think most school districts have computers, have given them out to their students, or they have access to buy more. The issue we're seeing more and more is the internet access.
Wow.
And then even with that, what does that mean? What if some families having problems logging on? Like, who helps them? So, there are some logistics issues that not all families have the resources to figure it out. And so that's upon us and school districts and educators, to bridge the gap to help the families and students that need the help, because otherwise some of these students were behind already. And after this, they'll be more behind. And that means it's a loss, not just for them, but for California.
Has there been any discussions, I guess, how to help these students, I guess, bridge the gap when they do come back in for in-person learning? Kind of catch them up to where they should be if they are behind? We put some money in the budget, a one-time block grant. We call it for learning loss, for districts to focus on just that, to, whether or not they're going to be every school district's different. We have 1,000 districts across California. Some may hire nonprofits to go and partner. Some may give stipends to college students to help work with students. Some may pay for overtime for teachers and instructional aides to work more with certain students and families. And so, but the big picture is, we have to acknowledge that, because there will be some students that are left behind. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Kevin. We'd love to have you back on, and I hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Dreamers.